For decades, the world has watched Iran with a mixture of suspicion, fear, and curiosity. Behind fortified research facilities and heavily guarded laboratories, the Islamic Republic quietly advanced a nuclear program that has long haunted global security discussions. Was it entirely peaceful, or did it conceal a darker ambition, one capable of reshaping the balance of power across the Middle East? Today, in 2026, that question is no longer theoretical. The events of the past year have upended old assumptions, shaken global diplomacy, and left Iran's future hanging in a delicate, dangerous balance. Iran's nuclear story begins not with revolution or conflict, but with cooperation. In the 1950s, under the Shah, the United States helped Iran establish its first research reactors as part of the Atoms for Peace initiative. Science, diplomacy, and ambition intertwined, planting seeds for a program that decades later would become a focal point of international anxiety. The Islamic Revolution of 1979 slowed this development, but did not eliminate it. Even amid sanctions, war, and political upheaval, Iran maintained a vision of scientific progress and technological independence. By the late 1980s, covert programs quietly resumed, blending civilian research with activities that Western intelligence suspected were aimed at weapons development. Facilities at Natanz, Arak, and Fordow became emblematic of a dual-use nuclear program, capable of producing energy or, if pushed, destruction. By the turn of the millennium, Iran's nuclear ambitions had become a source of global tension. The revelation of secret sites triggered sanctions, inspections, and diplomatic pressure, forcing Tehran to navigate a precarious path. Repeatedly, Iranian officials insisted that their work was entirely civilian, a claim that many in the West doubted. These debates culminated in 2015 with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, known as the JCPOA. Iran agreed to strict limits on uranium enrichment, unprecedented transparency, and inspections, and in return received relief from crippling economic sanctions. It was hailed as a triumph of diplomacy, a rare moment of compromise in a region often defined by confrontation. But peace, it seems, is fragile. In 2018, the United States under President Donald Trump withdrew from the agreement, reimposing harsh sanctions. Iran, facing renewed economic pressure and threats of military strikes, quietly began increasing uranium enrichment once more, remaining just below the thresholds that would trigger global alarm. Experts later called this approach strategic patience, advancing technical capability without crossing the line into weaponization, holding a promise in reserve, and betting on deterrence through ambiguity. The past year shattered this delicate equilibrium. Israeli and American forces launched strikes against Iranian nuclear and military infrastructure, killing key scientists and commanders. The scope of these attacks was unprecedented, undermining years of careful restraint and leaving Tehran reeling. Among those killed was Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, a seismic shock that upended the religious and political hierarchy of the country. In his place, Mojtaba Khamenei, his second son, assumed leadership, and the world is left facing new, uncharted questions. Who is this new leader? What will he do with the nuclear capabilities his father carefully nurtured but never weaponized? Speculation in Tehran and abroad is intense. Mujtaba remains largely hidden, a figure cloaked in secrecy, with few public statements to clarify his intentions. Within Iran, hardliners are already raising voices that once would have been taboo, arguing openly for a nuclear deterrent as a matter of survival, vengeance, and regional ambition. Analysts note that the old fatwa forbidding nuclear weapons may no longer hold the same sway. Elite opinion, public discourse, and the evolving threat environment have combined to create a climate in which previously unthinkable steps are being considered openly. Iran's nuclear capability is formidable. Reports from March 2026 indicate that Tehran possesses more than 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, enough to produce several nuclear devices if fully weaponized. The technical threshold has been crossed. What remains is political will. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has consolidated its influence, returning retired commanders to positions of power, guiding a younger, more aggressive generation of fighters, and amplifying the voices of those advocating for a nuclear capability. Commentators have spoken of Iran asserting itself as a global superpower, of the need to abandon past constraints in order to ensure deterrence against foreign aggression. Yet building a bomb is not merely a matter of uranium. Weaponization requires design expertise, delivery systems, and testing infrastructure. A crude device, sometimes referred to as a dirty bomb, could produce a nuclear explosion, though it would be less efficient and difficult to deliver militarily. Its primary value lies in signaling, in demonstrating capability and deterrence, rather than battlefield utility. Even a simple device could alter strategic calculations, not only in the Middle East but across the world. The regional implications are profound. Saudi Arabia has repeatedly indicated that if Iran develops a nuclear weapon, it would seek one in response, threatening to unravel decades of non-proliferation efforts. Israel, historically focused on maintaining a strategic edge, is already conducting its own covert operations to monitor and potentially neutralize Iran's capabilities. The possibility of a nuclear domino effect looms, raising questions about the stability of the entire region. Beyond strategy and politics, there is the human cost. Tehran's citizens live amid heightened security, airstrike warnings, and the fear of escalation. Schools close, hospitals strain, and everyday life is shadowed by uncertainty. The nuclear question is no longer abstract. It intersects with the lives of ordinary Iranians, caught between global machinations and domestic pressure. Economic hardship, inflation, and the disruptions of war weigh heavily on the population. In the streets of Tehran, ordinary conversations carry an undercurrent of tension, a recognition that the world is watching and that the choices of the leadership could shape not just the region, but the planet. The assassination of the supreme leader, the attacks on nuclear infrastructure, and the consolidation of hardline power have created a moment of decision. Strategic patience, the cautious path that kept Iran's ambitions latent but growing, has been replaced by an environment in which choices are framed by necessity, survival, and revenge. The country's stockpiles, its expertise, and its historical capabilities mean that the option to build a bomb is no longer theoretical. The question that once seemed distant has become urgent. Will Iran cross the line, and if so, when? International observers are watching closely. The United States, Europe, Russia, and China all recognize the stakes. Diplomatic channels are active, ceasefire proposals circulate, and sanctions remain a tool of pressure. Yet every action, every statement is measured against a backdrop of uncertainty and mistrust. Iran, cornered and absorbing punishment, has little incentive to maintain old limits, and its new leadership faces domestic pressure to assert strength in a world that has tested its patience repeatedly. The narrative of Iran's nuclear program is more than science, technology, or even strategy. It is a story of fear and ambition, of revenge and deterrence, of religion and politics intertwined in a delicate, often opaque calculus. The country stands at a crossroads, with choices that could ripple across the Middle East and reverberate globally. Will the new leadership honor the past constraints, or embrace a new doctrine of power that includes the ultimate deterrent? The answers remain uncertain, but the stakes could not be higher. As night falls over Tehran, the research reactors glow in the distance, silent sentinels of a nation poised between caution and ambition. The world waits, uncertain, knowing that every decision made within these fortified walls could reshape the future. History has brought Iran to this threshold, and the coming months may determine not only its fate, but the fate of the region and the rules that have long governed the spread of nuclear technology. The year 2025 marked a turning point in Iran's long, complex dance with the nuclear question. What had once been a carefully managed program, advancing incrementally under the shadow of international scrutiny, now found itself thrust into the chaos of open conflict. In the span of months, the delicate balance Tehran had maintained for decades was shattered. The world watched as a series of military strikes, covert operations, and political assassinations brought Iran to a crossroads, forcing its leaders to confront decisions they had long deferred. The first shock came with a wave of Israeli airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. For years, Israel had quietly monitored Tehran's program, assessing the stockpiles of uranium, the pace of enrichment, and the progress of centrifuge technology. In early 2025, intelligence suggested that Iran's enrichment had accelerated, edging closer to weapons-grade uranium. The strikes targeted key research sites, including centrifuge halls at Natanz and underground facilities at Fordo. Smoke and fire rose from structures that had been symbols of Iran's scientific ambition, and for the first time in decades, the threat of direct military action against nuclear facilities became tangible. Simultaneously, the United States launched its own operations. Key military leaders and nuclear scientists were eliminated in carefully coordinated attacks. The strikes were precise, aimed at crippling Iran's program while avoiding mass civilian casualties, but the psychological impact was profound. The message was clear. Any further movement toward nuclear weaponization would come with severe consequences. Within Tehran, the political and military leadership was forced to reckon with the stark reality that strategic patience had been broken, and restraint was no longer a guarantee of safety. Amid this violence, the unthinkable occurred. In late 2025, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was assassinated, an act that sent shockwaves through the nation and the wider world. For decades, Khamenei's religious authority had been the cornerstone of Iran's nuclear doctrine. His fatwa against nuclear weapons had served as both a moral and political anchor, restraining ambitions that might have escalated into full weaponization. His death created a power vacuum at the top of Iran's complex political hierarchy, raising immediate questions about succession, authority, and the future of the nuclear program. Into this void stepped Mojtaba Khamenei, the second son of the late supreme leader. Largely unknown to the public, he assumed leadership at a moment of extraordinary crisis. While his first public address focused on vengeance and the restoration of national pride, it offered no clarity on the nuclear issue. His physical presence remained largely hidden, fueling speculation and unease. Within Iran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, emboldened by the attacks and empowered by a new leadership structure, began consolidating power. Retired commanders were recalled to lead a younger, more aggressive generation of fighters, instilling a culture of vengeance and strategic assertiveness. Commentators on state television spoke openly of Iran's destiny as a global power, and for the first time in decades, calls for nuclear weapon development were no longer taboo. The technical reality of Iran's capabilities only intensified the sense of urgency. By early 2026, Iran reportedly possessed over 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, enough to produce several crude nuclear weapons if fully weaponized. Centrifuges were operating at advanced levels, and underground facilities remained fortified and secretive. Experts warned that should Iran choose to pursue a bomb, it could focus first on a simple, low-yield device, enough to demonstrate capability, signal deterrence, and assert power without necessarily developing a sophisticated arsenal capable of long-range delivery. The international response was cautious but urgent. Diplomatic channels were opened, ceasefire proposals circulated, and negotiations attempted to curb further escalation. The United States and its allies emphasized that any overt nuclear weaponization would have dire consequences, while simultaneously trying to avoid provoking Iran into a defensive posture that could accelerate its ambitions. China and Russia, while wary of regional instability, also recognized strategic opportunities, offering diplomatic cover to manage the crisis without outright confrontation. Within the region, tensions escalated sharply. Saudi Arabia, historically Iran's rival, had long signaled that any nuclear development in Tehran would compel Riyadh to pursue a similar path. Israel, with its advanced intelligence and military capabilities, prepared for the possibility of preemptive or reactive strikes, while Iran's neighbors watched anxiously, calculating their own strategic responses. The specter of a nuclear domino effect loomed, threatening to destabilize the entire Middle East and undermine decades of non-proliferation efforts. The war extended beyond political rhetoric. Yemen's Houthis, aligned with Iran through ideological and strategic channels, joined the conflict with ballistic missile attacks and drone strikes. The expansion of hostilities to multiple fronts created new vulnerabilities for Iran, while simultaneously demonstrating its capacity to project power regionally. The Strait of Hormuz, a critical artery for global oil shipments, became a flashpoint. Attacks and disruptions raised energy prices worldwide, affecting economies from Asia to Europe. Shipping lanes, ports, and global supply chains were imperiled, showing that the conflict's impact was not limited to the Middle East, but had cascading consequences across the globe. Inside Iran, public sentiment was mixed. On the streets of Tehran, citizens lived under constant tension. Air raid sirens, checkpoints, and the visible presence of the Revolutionary Guards created a climate of fear. At the same time, nationalist rhetoric and hardline narratives emphasized strength, resilience, and retaliation. Schools and hospitals strained under economic pressure, inflation, and the burden of conflict. Families whispered about the possibility of a nuclear confrontation, while young Iranians debated online the merits and dangers of their country's strategic choices. The human dimension of the conflict became inseparable from the geopolitical calculations of leaders. As the war unfolded, the question of the nuclear fatwa returned to the center of debate. Analysts noted that the rationale for restraint under Ali Khamenei, fear of attacks from the United States and Israel, had diminished in effect. The attacks had already occurred, and Iran had endured them. In this new reality, the ideological and religious constraints that once guided nuclear policy were being reconsidered, if not openly challenged. Hardliners argued that deterrence required demonstrating capability, that Iran could no longer afford to show vulnerability in the face of external aggression. The timing of these developments created a unique and dangerous convergence. Technical capability, regional ambition, and internal politics intersected at a moment when Iran was both cornered and emboldened. The nation's uranium stockpiles provided the material basis for weaponization, while military strikes and leadership shifts altered the calculus of restraint. Regional rivals contemplated their own strategic responses, and the global community grappled with the prospect of a new nuclear actor in the Middle East. The stakes could not have been higher. Despite the heightened risk, there remained strategic ambiguity. Iran had not officially abandoned its nuclear doctrine, and Mojtaba Khamenei's hidden presence maintained uncertainty. The possibility of negotiation, diplomacy, and restraint still existed, but the margin for error was shrinking. Every decision, every delay, could tilt the balance toward irreversible action. Experts warned that even a crude device would have far-reaching implications, altering deterrence, emboldening hardliners, and reshaping the geopolitical landscape. The region's history offered grim lessons. Previous conflicts had shown that perceived weakness invites escalation, while shows of strength can provoke countermeasures. Iran's current path was fraught with peril. The technical ability to produce a nuclear device existed. The political and military will was in flux. The international consequences loomed large. Leaders, analysts, and citizens alike understood that the next months would be decisive, not only for Iran, but for the future of the Middle East and the rules that govern nuclear proliferation worldwide. As night fell over Tehran, the research facilities glowed quietly, their presence a reminder of what has been achieved and what might come. Drones patrolled the skies, centrifuges spun in secrecy, and the Revolutionary Guards maintained vigilance over key sites. Outside, ordinary citizens continued their lives under the shadow of global uncertainty, aware that the choices of a few could ripple through the entire world. In homes, cafes, and offices, conversations hinted at fear, hope, and speculation, a reflection of the complex human dimension that underpins every strategic calculation. The coming months promised no respite. Iran's leadership faced a crucible of decision-making. Continue restraint under uncertain global pressure, pursue a demonstrative nuclear capability to assert power, or seek a negotiated path that might preserve both sovereignty and survival. Each option carried risks that could be measured in political fallout, regional escalation, and even global catastrophe. Analysts continued to debate the feasibility of weaponization, the implications of missile delivery systems, and the potential responses of regional actors, but certainty remained elusive. What is clear is that the actions taken now would define Iran's trajectory for decades to come. The war, already spreading through the Middle East, had shifted global perceptions of risk. Energy markets remained volatile, humanitarian crises deepened, and international institutions struggled to keep pace with events on the ground. For the first time in decades, the world confronted the reality that Iran, once contained by diplomacy and restraint, might soon possess a nuclear capability that could disrupt the established order. Every missile strike, every strategic decision, and every hidden maneuver contributed to a landscape of high-stakes uncertainty. The balance between deterrence and provocation was delicate, and one misstep could have consequences that would reverberate far beyond the region. The world now watches Iran with bated breath. After years of carefully measured programs, secret negotiations, and strategic patience, the nation stands at a threshold that could redefine the Middle East and reshape global power dynamics. The events of 2025 and 2026 have altered the calculus irreversibly. Leadership changes, military strikes, and internal political consolidation have combined to create a scenario in which the pursuit of nuclear weapons is no longer purely hypothetical, but a question of when and how it might happen. Mujtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader, remains largely unseen, a shadowed figure whose decisions could dictate not just the future of Iran, but the future of global security. His first public address emphasized vengeance and national pride, yet offered no clarity on the nuclear issue. Within Iran, hardliners and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps consolidate power, reinforcing a younger, more aggressive generation of leaders determined to assert Iran's influence regionally and internationally. Voices that were once restrained now speak openly about the need for nuclear weapons as tools of deterrence and survival, as instruments of pride and leverage against historic adversaries. Iran's technical capabilities provide the foundation for these ambitions. Its stockpile of highly enriched uranium, exceeding 400 kilograms, is sufficient to produce multiple crude nuclear devices. Centrifuges operate at advanced levels, and underground facilities remain fortified, secretive, and nearly impervious to external surveillance. Experts warn that even a simple low-yield weapon could provide Iran with political leverage, a deterrent against regional rivals, and a symbolic assertion of power, regardless of its immediate military utility. The regional implications are profound. Saudi Arabia has long signaled that a nuclear-armed Iran would compel Riyadh to develop its own program, a position made explicit by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman years earlier. Israel, with its sophisticated intelligence networks and advanced military capabilities, has prepared for potential preemptive or reactive action. Across the Middle East, nations observe closely, calculating the strategic consequences of a new nuclear actor in the region. The specter of proliferation looms large, threatening to unravel decades of non-proliferation efforts and destabilize an already volatile geopolitical landscape. Beyond geopolitics, the human dimension cannot be ignored. Tehran and other Iranian cities remain on high alert, with air raid sirens, checkpoints, and the visible presence of the Revolutionary Guards shaping everyday life. Families face uncertainty as schools and hospitals strain under economic pressure, inflation, and the threat of escalation. Conversations in cafes, markets, and homes reflect a mix of fear, hope, and speculation, a testament to the human stakes entwined with every decision made by those in power. The war, already spreading through the region, has intensified the urgency. Yemen's Houthis have launched missile strikes and drone attacks in coordination with Iranian interests, expanding the conflict to multiple fronts. The Strait of Hormuz, a vital artery for global oil shipments, has become a flashpoint, and disruptions to energy flows have sent ripple effects through global markets, affecting economies from Asia to Europe. The military dimension of the conflict demonstrates both Iran's vulnerabilities and its capacity to project power, revealing a new, complex battlefield that blends conventional, unconventional, and potential nuclear threats. Global powers continue to monitor these developments with careful attention. The United States emphasizes deterrence and sanctions while avoiding actions that could provoke Iran into accelerating weaponization. Europe, Russia, and China navigate a delicate balance of diplomacy, strategic interest, and regional stability. Efforts at negotiation persist, but uncertainty dominates. Every diplomatic initiative is measured against a backdrop of mistrust, and every delay increases the risk of irreversible action. Analysts note that Iran could choose a path of restraint, pursue a crude demonstration device, or seek a fully weaponized arsenal, and the world must prepare for all eventualities. One of the most pressing questions concerns the type of nuclear device Iran might pursue. A crude low-yield weapon, sometimes referred to as a dirty bomb, could provide symbolic deterrence without offering the sophistication necessary for intercontinental delivery. Such a device would demonstrate capability, signaling to regional adversaries that Iran possesses the means to protect itself and assert its sovereignty. A more sophisticated weapon, capable of long-range delivery, would radically shift strategic balances and provoke global alarm. In either scenario, Iran's decisions would reverberate far beyond its borders. The potential for regional proliferation adds another layer of complexity. A nuclear-armed Iran could trigger an arms race in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, historically focused on countering Iranian influence, may accelerate its own nuclear ambitions. Other regional actors, observing Tehran's moves and Riyadh's responses, could seek similar capabilities, threatening to destabilize an entire region that has already been fractured by conflict, sectarian divides, and external intervention. Experts warn that once one state crosses the nuclear threshold, others are unlikely to wait, creating a cascade effect with global consequences. Deterrence, however, is not absolute. Iran's missiles may not reach the United States, and even a small arsenal cannot offset the nuclear superiority of global powers with thousands of warheads. Instead, the value of a nuclear program lies in signaling, regional influence, and the ability to complicate strategic calculations. For Tehran, possession of a bomb is not just a military asset, it is a political and psychological tool, a demonstration that it is no longer vulnerable to the coercion and strikes that have defined recent conflicts. At the same time, internal pressures shape Iran's decision-making. The Revolutionary Guards have strengthened their grip on power, hardline commentators advocate for assertiveness, and domestic sentiment increasingly favors demonstrating strength. The assassination of Ali Khamenei, the strikes on nuclear facilities, and the repeated incursions by foreign forces have eroded the traditional rationale for restraint. In this context, the old fatwa against nuclear weapons may no longer hold moral or political authority. The nation's leadership now confronts a choice between continuing the cautious path of strategic patience or pursuing a nuclear capability that could alter the course of history. The international community faces difficult choices as well. Diplomacy, sanctions, and military posturing are tools available to influence Iran's decisions, yet each carries risk. Escalation could provoke further entrenchment, while restraint may be interpreted as weakness. Global institutions, already stretched by crises from energy security to climate change, must contend with the possibility of a nuclear actor in one of the world's most volatile regions. The stakes extend far beyond the Middle East, touching upon global norms, non-proliferation treaties, and the rules that have long governed the spread of nuclear technology. Despite these challenges, pathways to restraint still exist. Negotiation, covert diplomacy, and back-channel communications continue to operate, aiming to prevent a nuclear tipping point. The success of these efforts depends on timing, credibility, and the ability to offer Iran assurances that preserve both its security and its international standing. Analysts note that a combination of technical constraints, targeted incentives, and regional dialogue could influence Iran's trajectory, though the window for effective action is narrowing with each passing month. The human dimension remains central to the unfolding story. For ordinary Iranians, the threat of nuclear escalation intersects with daily life in tangible ways. Airstrikes, economic instability, and military mobilization have transformed cities into spaces of uncertainty. Families weigh the dangers of conflict, communities confront shortages, and a pervasive sense of vigilance shapes social behavior. The pursuit of nuclear weapons is no longer abstract or distant. It touches the lives of millions, creating a climate of fear, resilience, and adaptation. As Tehran's night skyline glows with the energy of research reactors and fortified facilities, the world stands at a crossroads. The next moves of Iran's leadership will define not only its destiny but the strategic architecture of the Middle East. Will Mojtaba Khamenei maintain restraint, seeking negotiation and survival? Will Iran pursue a crude nuclear demonstration to assert its capabilities? Or will it embark on a path toward full weaponization, triggering regional proliferation and global alarm? Each scenario carries profound consequences, and the decisions made now may reverberate for decades to come. The coming months are critical. Technical capabilities exist, political pressures are intense, and regional rivals watch every development closely. A nuclear-capable Iran would alter strategic calculations across the globe, redefining deterrence, regional influence, and the balance of power. Analysts warn that once the threshold is crossed, the effects are irreversible. New actors may enter the nuclear domain, existing powers may recalibrate their strategies, and the rules of global security could be rewritten. Yet amid the tension and uncertainty, one fact remains clear. Iran has reached a pivotal moment. The combination of uranium stockpiles, military strikes, leadership changes, and internal pressures has created a scenario in which the pursuit of nuclear weapons is no longer theoretical. The choices of a few leaders could determine the fate of millions, the stability of a region, and the broader dynamics of global security. History has brought Iran to this point, and the world waits, uncertain, knowing that the decisions of today will echo across generations. The story of Iran's nuclear program is ultimately a story of ambition, survival, and human consequence. It is a tale of science, politics, ideology, and the fragile calculus of deterrence. As the sun rises and sets over Tehran, as centrifuges spin and missiles are tested, the world watches with anticipation and fear. The nation's future, the region's stability, and global security all hang in the balance, suspended between restraint and escalation, diplomacy and confrontation, life and destruction. The next chapter remains unwritten. Will Iran step back from the brink, or will it embrace a path that alters the course of history? Only time will tell, but the world is watching, aware that the consequences of these decisions are unprecedented and irreversible. The threshold has been crossed, and the future of the Middle East, and perhaps the globe, will be defined by the choices made now in the hidden halls of power, beneath the lights of research reactors, and in the minds of leaders who carry the weight of history on their shoulders.